For over 2 years, we've been investigating the origins of COVID, and our efforts have hit many roadblocks. Frankly, it feels like a massive cover-up, and we can't get the answers we deserve. Congressman Jordan, thanks for joining me today.
Good to be with you.
You know, why don't you just give us a little bit of an update on your work right now and what you think about this cover-up?
Well, let me first thank you, because you've been a leading voice on this, and talking about gain of function and your bill that you've got to get rid of that, which is great. And just as a position and someone in the United States Senate, we appreciate your leadership. I think what's interesting today is we just had a select committee. There's one select committee in the Congress on coronavirus. It's been in existence now for a couple years, and we just had a hearing today. The whip in the House, Mr. Clyburn, is the chairman of the committee, and our whip, Steve Scalise, is the ranking member. We had a hearing today, and it was Dr. Walensky, Dr. Murthy, so you got the head of the CDC, you got the Surgeon General, but no Fauci. I found it interesting that, Fauci, you couldn't go a day without seeing him in the news somewhere, and what Time made him a guardian of the year. And now he won't show up, and we invited him to come. So it's been now almost a year, and Fauci, since he's last testified in front of the House. So I find that interesting in this whole investigation. But the key is we know, or we're convinced, that Dr. Fauci, Dr. Collins, and others knew right from the get-go that this thing most likely came from a lab. And I think they took real concerted steps to make sure the country didn't get that information. And I think you could almost say tried to conceal that, tamp that down, and frankly attack people. We've seen some emails where they said we're going to take down these other physicians and virologists who said something different and who said they should do different things. So I think the key factor in my mind is, and you and I have talked about this, Senator, is they knew right away. They knew right away, or they suspected right away, that this thing came from a lab. And because I think they were concerned about what that meant and the money that was going to that lab, they tried to conceal it.
I want to go back and talk a bit more about the significance of the February 1st, 2020 meeting led by Dr. Fauci and NIH head Dr. Francis Collins. Yeah. These scientists who in January 2020 described in emails and public statements there was a significant chance COVID was made and leaked from a lab in Wuhan, China. These same scientists suddenly flip-flopped and co-authored articles in respected journals like Lancet and Nature. And oh, by the way, the national media jumped on those publications to chastise independent thinkers and big tech used that censored any of those who questioned Dr. Fauci.
Right.
Congressman Jordan, why did these scientists flip-flop? In just a matter of days, they said, in January said there's a significant chance that this could have came from a lab. Within days, they flip-flop and say there's no chance it could have came from a laboratory.
Yeah. I think in 4 days' time, and the intervening event was that meeting on February 1st. So January 31st, 2020, so more than 2 years ago, Dr. Fauci at 10:32 p.m. that evening gets an email from Dr. Christian Anderson, one of these virologists around the world.
Well-respected.
Yeah, well-respected, but we've been receiving our tax dollars, your constituent, my constituent, the American taxpayers' money to do research and different things. So Dr. Anderson sends an email to Dr. Fauci, 10:32 p.m., January 31st, 2020. Email says, virus looks engineered, virus is not consistent with evolutionary theory. That is a fancy way of saying this thing probably came from a lab. So what does Dr. Fauci do? He starts emailing his top assistant, Dr. Auchincloss, who's worked with him for 15 years, emails him at midnight, emails someone else at 2 in the morning. He goes into full tilt, in my judgment, full tilt, cover your backside mode. Next day, he organizes the meeting you talked about, this conference call where it's Dr. Fauci, Dr. Collins, and 11 virologists, including Christian Anderson, who sent him the initial email. And also on that call are Dr. Gary, and the readouts and the emails we've now gotten via FOIA and everything else that we've been able to look at, the emails we've now looked at, they show that the consensus on that call was this thing probably came from a lab. The one that stands out was there was an email after the call, a few hours after the call from Dr. Gary to some of the other doctors on the conference call. And he says in the email, says, I don't know how this happens in nature. It would be easy to do in a lab. So that's the consensus on the call. It's pretty clear. And then within a matter of days, as you said, Senator, in a matter of days, they changed their position. And it's just like, what caused? Seems to me the only thing that really sort of happened was this conference call that Fauci and Collins are so eager to do after that initial email on the 31st of January at 10:32 p.m. from Dr. Anderson. And then, as you point out, They do the article in Nature Medicine magazine. That becomes then the article that gets cited in the Lancet, and then that becomes the gospel that this didn't come from a lab. And we go with sort of that narrative, and anyone who, smart people like you who are a physician and start questioning, no, you're crazy, they all say, and they do a takedown on people who disagree with them, and they push it. And then, of course, the end of the story is in May of 2020, so a few months later, Dr. Anderson and Dr. Gary get an $8.9 million grant from the American taxpayers that Dr. Fauci and Dr. Collins control and decide who gets that money.
Jim, we're hoping that you have a gavel back in your hand come next year. And could you imagine getting to ask the people that attended this secret call and asking them what they talked about, and why can't we get a readout of that particular meeting? Would that be standard for there to be some type of readout of this?
Well, one of the things we've done is we're putting those 11 virologists on notice, and you're thinking like a good oversight person should, and like a legislator should. Those are the first people you want to talk to. You want to talk to the 11 guys on that call, and you want to find out what exactly did happen. We've seen the emails and the correspondence after the call, subsequent to the call, but what all happened? And there's a whole series of questions we want to ask them, and we want to find out what exactly Dr. Fauci and Dr. Collins may have had to say on that particular phone call. So yeah, that's how you start investigations. You don't bring in Fauci for a deposition right away. You start by looking at these folks who are on the call, get all the documents you can, unredacted form. So that's something that needs to happen. I'm hoping the Senate's going to be in Republican hands. We're hoping the House is going to be that way as well. And we're already talking about joint type of investigation we can do, because the country deserves the truth. Here's the key. I mean, we want to know how this happened. We want to pass your legislation, make sure that becomes law. We'll see if Joe Biden would sign it. But we got to think about what they did to our First Amendment liberties over the last year. I mean, I tell people every talk I give around the country or in our district, every right we enjoy as Americans under the First Amendment, your right to practice your faith, your right to assemble, right to petition your government, freedom of press, freedom of speech, every single one has been assaulted by the left, Democrat mayors, Democrat governors, members of Democrats here in Congress. So that's why this is also critically important and why we need to get to the truth. And then, of course, we never want this kind of thing to happen again.
Yeah. I'm not sure what you're hearing back home, but Kansans are mad as heck about losing our civil liberties, and they're ready to fight. Yep,
well said. And well, they should be. I mean, and there was a memo that the Attorney General put out when this first started in April 2020, Attorney General Barr, and he said in that memorandum that went out to U.S. attorneys across the country, he said the Constitution is not suspended during a crisis. And amen to that. And I would actually say that, in fact, is when it's most important. When times are tough is when the rules and the fundamentals and the principles that make us the greatest country ever, that's when they count the most. And what we saw was Democrats run roughshod over the First Amendment, over the Constitution, and that's why Kansans and Ohioans are ticked about it.
I think if you're going to understand this story and the cover-up, you have to know who EcoHealth Alliance is. So EcoHealth Alliance is a U.S.-based, nonprofit, non-government organization led by Peter Daszak. And if I could get one witness, it would be Peter Daszak.
I agree.
But EcoHealth is a go-between. They specialize in researching emerging infections. They budget $10 to $15 million a year from our taxpayers' dollars, from Dr. Fauci, from the Department of Defense, from DHS. And they often function as a conduit, a go-between. So what's in this particular case is so vitally important to understand is Dr. Fauci gave money to Peter Daszak and EcoHealth, who gave the money to the Wuhan Institute of Virology, Dr. Shi. And that's the story here. We studied genetics a little bit in medical school, but just like fingerprints, every organism has a unique set of DNA. It's like the blueprint for that particular organism. It's what makes your eyes brown and your hair brown. It makes you a human.
Hair receding.
Your hair gray in our case as well. But each one of us have a very unique blueprint. These DNA sequences tell a story of your family. So I could look at your grandparents' DNA, your cousin's DNA, and I could find the similarity. And this information is so valuable. When a scientist studies an organism, they store that exact sequence in the special DNA in a genomic lag bank. Now, as you can imagine, Dr. Shi, she's the bat lady of this story, at the Wuhan Institute of Virology, had a computer bank full of DNA sequences from bat coronaviruses. She was the expert in the world on bat coronaviruses. Any bat coronavirus for the past 40 years, Dr. Shi had it in this vault of hers. But suspiciously, as we found out in September of 2019, 4 months before you and I even heard the word COVID virus, she took down her genomic lab bank. So that's very significant. That's another reason we think that this outbreak probably actually started in August or September of 2019. Now, additionally, the Wuhan Institute of Virology was storing similar data of DNA sequences in a lab bank at the NIH. She was able to get those taken down with the United States NIH's blessing in 2020. This is all data that you and I would have loved to have seen.
Heck yeah.
We would think that if we could find the grandfather of COVID, the cousin of COVID, that we would be able to trace it to that laboratory. They had the opportunity, if they would show us that data, they could prove their innocence or it might prove their guilt.
U.S. lawmakers want more answers, too, with ranking members of the House Oversight and Judiciary Committees, Republicans, in recent days asking President Biden's HHS secretary for greater access to Dr. Fauci and NIH emails and notes from the earliest days of the pandemic.
Jim, again, you've done many of these investigations. This is probably my first major one. I can't believe how hard it is to get simple information from the government. An unredacted email, readouts on phone calls. Has it always been this hard? How are you guys doing over there?
Yes, it has. And one of the frustrating things is, we do letters after letters. You've sent letters to different agencies on different subjects, but on this particular one, we're talking CDC, we're talking other HHS and places you send. But it seems that the people who do the FOIAs on the outside actually get the information before we do, which is frustrating. We're an separate and equal branch of government. In fact, the founders put together the Constitution. The first branch they talk about is the legislative branch. So it is frustrating. Frustrating to see that. So yeah, we've seen it when the IRS does. When the IRS was targeting people, we saw it in the whole Trump-Russia stuff. The Russia, as President Trump says. And of course, we're seeing it here. We actually had one of our staffers on the Oversight Committee and also on the Select Committee on Coronavirus had to go to the HHS into the room and copy some of those emails we were just talking about from the that February 1st conference call. Emails subsequent to that call about the call itself. I had to go in and just copy those down because they wouldn't give them to us, for goodness sake. So yeah, it's always frustrating, but the truth is you just got to keep pressing because the folks back home want the truth. They don't want this to happen again. As we said before, they're concerned about what happened to the right. So you just got to keep going. And then I think there'll be a whistleblower. There'll be someone come. We've had whistleblower come forward on this. On this issue of the Justice Department targeting moms and dads and school boards who show up at school board meetings, treating parents as domestic terrorists. We had a whistleblower from the FBI come forward there. So I think that will happen as we get in. If we take back the majority and we get in the investigation like you and I want to, I think you'll have someone come forward and start to give us more information.
I do too, and I think that there's going to be a scientist especially that's going to sit there and say, oh my gosh, what have we done? Congressman Jordan, when I go back home, one of the most common questions I get is why? Why would Dr. Fauci want to cover this up? What's his motivation? You're investigating a crime. Usually there's a motivation. What's going on here? Do you think?
Great question. What's the motive? I think the motive is Dr. Fauci and Dr. Collins control this. Call it a fiefdom, call it whatever you want, but they control the grant money that goes out, billions of dollars that goes out, and they're in control of that. And they did not want to have this black mark, this problem on their record. When you're handing out money like that, and you're the guy in charge, and you can control what kind of research and change that study if you want to get this money, kind of thing. And then you have a virus, a deadly virus on the loose from China, and likely comes from a lab where you're doing research on coronavirus, and a lab where our tax dollars went to. I mean, think about it. You got three key facts there, because Fauci sort of denied all these at the front end, but it sure looks like they're all actually true. Looks like they were doing gain-of-function research there. Looks like our tax dollars went there, EcoHealth dollars to EcoHealth, to the Wuhan Institute of Virology lab. And it looks like that's where the virus started. So you got a deadly virus on the loose, and you find out on January 31st, 2020, that it looks like it came from the lab, and oh, by the way, American tax dollars were gone there, and it was gain-of-function research, looks like, that's a concern. And so let's downplay that as quick as we can. And I think that's was what put him into his, the old cover your backside mode that he instantly went into there on January 31st and February 1st.
Yeah, I think we can't stress enough about power corrupting absolutely. Dr. Fauci's been there for some 40 years.
Yep.
He literally controls, I think it's $5 or $10 billion a year. EcoHealth, all these scientists every year depended upon him giving each one of them $1 million of each year, creating this conflict of interest.
I think there are like 30-some thousand employees. When you look at CDC and NIH, I think it's like 30-some thousand employees, and I think it's in the neighborhood of like $50-some billion. And the thing I come back to is, guess how many real studies on natural immunity they've done? No. Zero. Yeah. But oh, we're gonna fund with American tax dollars a lab in China. I mean, one of the first questions I would ask is, we shouldn't be doing gain-of-function research. And again, you've been the lead on that, and you're so right. But also, why are we funding research in China at the beginning? We don't have great universities, great labs here in the United States, for goodness sake. So all of that's scary, and then it happens, and you're like, Shazam! Dr. Fauci's like, we got to do something. Yeah. Let's downplay it.
Yeah, and just even recently, we're doing some type of bio research in Ukraine, and I don't know how much fire is there with that smoke, but it is very frustrating to me to see taxpayer dollars doing this research out of the nation, and you got to sit there and think, is it so dangerous we can't do it here, or why are they doing it someplace else?
I've asked the same questions, and it shouldn't happen. Again, if the American people put us in charge and we have the majorities in the House and Senate, we should pass your bill. We should say we're not going to be funding stuff in communist China, for goodness sake, and in some other places around the world. Let's bring it home here.
I compare this to like doing nuclear research with Iran. That's what we were doing with China.
Yeah, good comparison.
Yeah.
Good comparison.
Jim, take us into the Oval Office in January of 2020. If Dr. Fauci had come clean at that moment, he walks into the Oval Office, says, President Trump, there's a virus out there. This could become a pandemic. And oh, by the way, this virus maybe was made in a lab, so all bets are off. You're going to ask me, well, what's this virus going to do? And my answer is going to be, I don't know. We've never seen a virus like this before. Do you think that President Trump would have responded any differently?
Well, the short answer is we don't know, but what we do know is Dr. Fauci should have told him. I mean, he didn't even tell him that there was American tax dollars going to the lab. So the idea that you go back to January 31st at 10:32 p.m., he gets that email and he's like, "Oh, sugar! Look at this email. We got a deadly virus on the loose. We got a lab in China that got our tax dollars, maybe gain of function, and it looks like it came from the lab, according to one of the virologists that I've had enough confidence in to give millions of American tax dollars to." That's his first call. Shouldn't have been to his top assistant. Shouldn't have been to, I forget, he had an email at 2 in the morning to someone. So he should have got on the phone and called the president. Or certainly the next day say, hey, Mr. President, Commander-in-Chief, I need to let you in on something. Or if you didn't want to give potentially bad news, which that certainly seems to me to be pretty darn bad news, if you didn't be one to, the bearer of bad news, as they say, call the chief of staff. You and I know Mark Meadows, right? Call Mark Meadows. Call the chief of staff. Because, call him up and say, he worked with Mark Meadows. Dr. Fauci was running this task force. Or call the vice president, who was going to be in a few weeks named as the head of the task force. Call someone. He didn't do that. He organized a conference call with 11 virologists, and him and Dr. Collins, who control this fiefdom and all the money and power that you talked about, Senator, they said, we're going to handle it this way. We're going to cover it up. That's what I think happened. I think the evidence points in that direction, but that is such a good question. He should have let the commander-in-chief, after all, this is in China. This is not in like some, the 190 some countries, whatever there are in the world. This is a pretty important adversary, pretty important country that we're talking about. He should have let the president know.
Jim, we've been at this for 2 years trying to figure out the origin of COVID. Yeah. You and I feel like there was a cover-up. Make your case to America. What are your final thoughts?
Well, the first thing I would say is just sort of step back in a broad sense and remember just about everything the Biden administration and Dr. Fauci told us turned out to not be true, right? I mean, Joe Biden, when he came into office, he said, I got a plan. He obviously didn't. I mean, it's been a disaster. He told us I will never put a mandate for a vaccine. Well, he did, so much so that the Supreme Court had to tell him it was unconstitutional. Dr. Fauci said it didn't come from a lab, it wasn't gain of function, we didn't pay for it. All three of those things look like they're false. They told us the vaccinated can't get it. They told us that the vaccinated can't transmit it. Both of those turned out to be wrong. They basically told us in different words, forget about natural immunity, that doesn't count. We all know it does. And then they told us masks work. And then, of course, Fauci said 0 mask, 1 mask, 2 mask, no mask, 1 mask, 2 masks, back to 1, now we're back to 0. I mean, he's been, so I think you start from there. Like, and then this push by the administration. I mean, Jen Psaki said, we're working with social media platforms to limit the information Americans. I'm like, talk about an attack on the First Amendment rights.
Your head's exploding, right?
Yeah, I mean, like, from the White House press room, you're making a statement saying we're going to limit the press. It's frightening. So you start from that, and then you get into the specifics, which we touched on. He knew from the get-go, from that initial email in late January, then the conference call. They get people to change their positions. They get them to write the paper. Fauci gets a chance to edit that paper. That paper then gets cited in the Lancet, which becomes the gospel for them to tell the whole world that, oh, no, it didn't come from a lab. It was a bat to a pangolin to a hippopotamus to Joe Rogan, and then, millions of people. I mean, it's like, well, do they think we're all stupid? You and I might be in flyover country, but the folks we represent, smart people with a lot of common sense, and they figure it out. So that's the case you make. And when you do that, and you let people know some of those key facts that you know, and then you get to add in the science, which I don't understand, the country gets it. They know that they were misled. And that's why, again, to get to the bottom of it, to make sure that there's truth out there so we can protect people's fundamental First Amendment liberties and hopefully prevent this from happening again and save people's lives, that's why we do it.
There you go. Jim, thanks for all your
work. You bet. Thank you, Senator.
Yeah.
Keep up the good work.
Thanks. You too.